3 measures of Gordon's gin, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quinoa lillet, which is not vermouth. Shaken well until it is ice cold, then served with a large, thin slice of lemon peel.
Welcome, everybody. We are currently ranking all of the films from the James Bond franchise, one by one, episode by episode. Tonight, numero uno, we are discussing Dr. No, starring Sean Connery.
Let's talk about Ian Fleming first. He wrote and created James Bond, and he based it off of secret agents and commando types that he had met during World War II. Ian Fleming himself was a British Navy intelligence agent. So the name James Bond, however, comes from an ornithologist named James Bond. Fleming had a book that, he had around his house called Birds of the West Indies by James Bond, and he thought this is the best name because it's dull, and he wanted Bond to kind of just be this basic person that you wouldn't assume to be a secret agent, essentially. So he went with James Bond. Dr. No isn't the first Bond on-screen appearance. That goes to Casino Royale, a teleplay version for the CBS show Climax in 1954, only a year after the book was written. To get the Bond franchise started, however, the one that we all talk about as the official Bond franchise, it started with Canadian Harry Saltzman, who had bought the rights for the James Bond books from Ian Fleming, and he had met another producer named Albert R. Broccoli, and yes, his last name is Broccoli, like the vegetable. His family actually came from broccoli farmers. Broccoli wanted to make a Bond film. He wanted to buy the rights from Saltzman, and instead they decided, hey, let's just partner up, let's create our own company, and so they created Eon Productions, which stands for Everything or Nothing, and they also created the company Danjaq, which would hold the rights for all the Bond films. They had trouble getting funds at first when they started out, and when you make a movie, you have to go to, usually you try to go to studios to pitch the project to get the funds to make the film, but many of the studios that they went to, they weren't interested. They were just saying, oh, this is too British. This is too sexy, and yes, this is, even though this is 1960s, this is early 1960s, we're just coming out of the 50s. So eventually they go to United Artists. United Artists gives them $1 million, which isn't a lot of money, but it's for a film at this time, it's not a lot of money. And United Artists UK was able to give them an extra $10,000 to finish the climax of this movie. So originally the duo wanted to make Thunderball as the first James Bond film. But due to rights issues, which we are going to get into, fellas, as once we get to Thunderball, they weren't able to make that film. So they decided to do the 6th book in the Bond franchise, and that is Dr. No.
Do you know why they specifically picked Dr. No as opposed to any of the others?
I think it probably just had to do with, again, the setting is...
It's much more straightforward. It's 2 locations, Jamaica, and then a big base scene. That's it.
So having a low starting budget probably weighed heavily on that decision. Yeah. Okay.
The directing of this film was Terence Young. He's also responsible for teaching Connery, and I quote, how to be dapper, witty, and above all else, cool. The casting for this movie, we have, obviously, film stars, obviously Sean Connery as James Bond, Swiss actress Ursula Andreas as Honey Ryder, Canadian actor, not Asian actor, Joseph Wiseman as Dr. No. And again, this is the 60s.
Ian Fleming himself had suggested his cousin for the role of Dr. No. His cousin happened to be a certain Sir Christopher Lee.
Come, Mr. Bond, you disappoint me. You get as much fulfillment out of killing as I do, so why don't you admit it?
Who was not selected, of course.
What?
That is true. That is true.
Wait. Christopher Lee and Ian Fleming are relatives?
They're cousins.
Yep.
And they're both secret agents?
Yes.
Yep.
You did not know this?
No! Yeah. I knew that they were both secret agents. I didn't know they were cousins.
So they obviously didn't select Christopher Lee to play Dr. No in this film, but of course he does go on later to play Francisco Scaramanga.
Seeing him as Doctor, that would have been a hell of a splash.
Yeah, no shit,
first
right?
bad guy.
To us, Mr. Bond.
I'm flattered.
I imagine though that they wouldn't want the bad guy of their new franchise to be a horror star, right? Like it might distract
Dracula.
From what they're trying to do.
Well, he had already started playing Dracula in the Hammer films by this point, right, Patterson?
I believe so, yes.
Because those movies were like in the 50s. They weren't in the, like, they look like they're later, but no, they were filmed in the 50s. So Q is actually present in this film, if you didn't know. The character of Major Boothroyd is played by Peter Burton. He is the guy who brings Bond his first, the Walther PPK.
He's referred to as the Armorer.
Yes, but the character, if you listen carefully, M says, "Thank you, Major Boothroyd," as he leaves the room. So yes, that character is meant to be Q, and Peter Burton just couldn't come back for the next film, and so we then get Desmond Llewellyn as the returning Q in all the feature films. All right, so let's talk about Bond, the casting of Bond, what came into it, because this is a very important character to cast, of course, for film history and for the franchise itself. So when it came to Bond, many other names and actors were looked at, including movie star Cary Grant. And you might know Cary Grant from North by Northwest. He was in many Hitchcock films. He was a big movie star of the time. However, Cary Grant was like, I'll do one film. He didn't want to do the 5-film contract that they were offering him. And they wanted somebody who could do multiple of these films because they were trying to create this franchise. So they passed on Cary Grant. Other actors that they looked into included Roger Moore, but they thought he looked too young. They weren't interested in him, and he's actually older than Connery, surprisingly. Ian Fleming himself had his sights on David Nevin. David Nevin, if you know who he is, he looks more like an Alfred Butler type from Batman. He doesn't really invoke what you and I would think as James Bond. But if you look at how Ian Fleming looks, and considering Ian Fleming is writing this character as himself, I kind of see the connection. But David Nevin would come back to play in Casino Royale, the parody film that would come out a few years later, also as James Bond. And then finally, in Broccoli and Saltzman decided on 32-year-old Scottish actor Sean Connery, as we all know, after a meeting with him where he was very direct and took control. Fleming, however, he wasn't a fan originally, though he said he wasn't as suave as the character in the books, but eventually he warmed up to him. And after the film, and he even rewrote Bond in the books to compensate for Connery's Scottish heritage. If you've seen Skyfall, you know all about this, and we'll get to that, of course. United Artists also originally they weren't fans of Connery when they said that, basically because Connery was an unknown at the time. They wanted somebody known, considering this was a new franchise. But obviously, the rest is history. Connery became James Bond, and we got this amazing franchise. So let's move on to the music of James Bond. So in this first movie, the music was composed by Monty Norman, and he is the one who composed the music for Dr. No, and he wrote the famous theme song of the famous James Bond theme song. However, the composer John Barry, arranged or orchestrated the music for the film, and John Barry is an important name because he'll go on and he'll do the music for many of the other films. There has been some discrepancy about who wrote the James Bond theme, but if you watch all the subsequent ones, it will say Monty Norman wrote the theme. John Barry had arranged it in the original film. Production design. So another big name you'll hear about these films is Ken Adams. He's a name you should know. He was a production designer for many of the Bond films. He gave the films their iconic look. You can see this particularly in the scenes where Dr. Dent is giving the tarantula to Dr. No, and all the elaborate Dr. No lair sets. The aquarium in the film, the scene where they go to have dinner with Dr. No, is actually a blown-up projection of stock footage of goldfish. Again, they only had $1 million to make this movie, which isn't a lot, so they had to do what they had to do to compensate. So then a few lines are added of dialogue to cover up the discrepancy.
The glass is convex, 10 inches thick, which accounts for the magnifying effect.
When Bond leaves the scene and he looks over and he sees this painting, that painting is the portrait of Duke of Wellington, which actually was stolen. It was stolen a year before the movie came out, so in '61. And Ken Adams thought it would be a cute idea to be like, oh, well, Dr. No stole the painting, of course. So when audience see that, it's kind of like a wink to the audience, like, this is the guy who stole this painting. And then the painting would eventually be recovered in '65. So it's just a fun little note in the film, but as an audience now and living in 2020 or 2021, I should say, you don't get that reference unless you know that. Obviously, this film is a film of first, right? We have the first Bond, the first M, first Moneypenny, Q, Felix Leiter, the first Bond girl, first mention of an introduction of Spectre.
Spectre? Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion.
which will turn into the next couple of films. The first Bond setting traps scene, which I like to, it's when Bond's, taking hairs out of his head and putting it onto doors and making sure that people haven't spied in his hotel room, which you'll see that scene again in other films. It's the first chase sequence, first casino scene, first villain's lair. So there's a lot of hallmarks to the franchise as a whole. This film had a budget of $1.1 million, and it premiered on October 5th of 1962 and grossed $59.5 million. So it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, extreme return on investment.
Oh, yeah.
Which probably, explains a lot about, the long-lasting success of the franchise in general. Because obviously, if you get a good start, the studio is going to be much more willing to part with a lot more budget going forward. So
we're at 25 films. I think had the first one flopped, they I think inevitably somebody would have tried again. But when that first one goes, nobody wants to touch it for a long time, right? I mean,
right.
You can imagine a universe where Bond didn't exist until, Casino Royale was picked up in the 2000s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But luckily it was a hit, and then we've been enjoying the same story retold over and over and over. But all right, sorry. Before we go any further, though, guys, just to keep it strictly ceremonious, because obviously we can't rank anything if we only have one film. But all the same, sticking to ceremony, does anybody have a proposition for an official ranking for Dr. No?
Based on our current ranking, I would have to say it's number one.
Number one? Okay, number one. So Patterson says number one. Anybody want to second that?
I
second the best current Bond film.
Seconded. Okay, cool.
Out of what we've reviewed,
Dr. No
the best.
has been officially put on the list as the number one Bond film out of one film. So,
yes, we did it.
Moving
We're
on.
done, guys.
Yeah, we're done.
Let's pack it up.
All right, we're great.
Thanks for listening.
Cheers to that. What you really don't get a lot of throughout any Bond film is just a general, just kind of day to day. Like, you never really think of James Bond doing paperwork or anything like that, right? But I'm just gonna read this little bit off of. This is from Moonraker. This is from the beginning of Moonraker, which is the third book. And first off, though, I just want to take some guesses. How much money per year do you guys think James motherfucking Bond makes? Starting with McCurdy, how much money do you think he makes?
Good question.
100 pounds.
All right.
100,000 pounds, not 100 pounds.
Per year?
And we're going to say, like,
100,000 per
in
year.
today's money, we're going to say, in today's money.
Oh, shit.
Oh.
I didn't know that.
So okay, so 100,000 pounds. What do you think, Jeff?
In today's money, I would hope somewhere like 800 to a million.
Okay, Patterson.
You hope.
So, if I may give a complex answer, I always pictured Bond as having kind of two different revenue streams. Because I would have figured he would have gotten paid a certain amount of money, but then he also would have been granted like a fund through the government, like they fund his
Like
activity.
a per diem?
Yeah, per diem. That is the term.
Regardless of how much he spends on a mission, how much do you think he makes paid out, official check, salary style?
So actually, yeah, I would probably agree with McCurdy. I'd probably say $100,000
Okay.
in U.S. dollars.
All right, Scott, what do you think?
And this is back in his time. The dollar value back then.
We're gonna say the pounds,
Or
right?
current.
The pounds. How many pounds did he make in, let's say, in today's money, because nobody knows the conversion rate.
Let's say $250,000.
Okay. And Nans, what you got?
Yeah, I think you guys are lowballing it. A secret agent, I'm gonna have to go at least 5 million.
I'm just gonna read this again. This is from the third book in the series, Moonraker. the whole beginning is just Bond talking about his day-to-day life, which again we never get. He says it was the beginning of a typical routine day for Bond. It was only 2 or 3 times a year that an assignment came along requiring his particular abilities. So, he's just doing shit day to day until he goes off and saves the world 3 times a year. For the rest of the year, he had the duties of an easygoing senior civil servant, elastic office hours from around 10 to 6, lunch, generally in the canteen, evenings spent playing cards in the company of a few close friends or at Crockford's, or making love with rather cold passion to one of 3 similarly disposed married women. Weekends playing golf for high stakes at one of the clubs near London. He took no holidays, but was generally given a fortnight's leave at the end of each assignment, in addition to any sick leave that might be necessary. He earned £1,500 a year, the salary of, and I'll get to that, I'll tell you the conversion. He earned £1,500 a year, the salary of a principal officer in the civil service, and he had $1,000 a year free of tax of his own. When he was on a job, he could spend as much as he liked, so for the other months of the year, he could live very well on his £2,000 a year net. He had a small but comfortable flat off the King's Road, an elderly Scottish housekeeper, a treasure called May, and a 1930 4.5-liter Bentley coupe supercharged, which he kept expertly tuned so that he could do 100 when he wanted to. On these things he spent all his money, and it was his ambition to have as little as possible in his banking account when he was killed, as when he was depressed, he knew he would be before the statutory age of 45. Just a little insight into the day-to-day life of Bond outside of saving the world. So if you use the Googles to find out how much £2,000 was in 1955, that's roughly 52,818 pounds and 72 bits or whatever the fuck, pence, whatever they say. So he basically, I mean, he makes more than like Delta Force does technically, but he still works for the government, so he doesn't really, no wonder he lives it up as much as he can when he's out saving the world.
That's why I mentioned like my complex answer is because I pictured Bond himself not getting paid all that much, but him also having access to a card that gave him like basically a platinum card of taxpayer money, and he abused the fuck out of it.
So he's during the mission, he's just wearing all these really fancy suits. When he's not on mission, he's just at his home wearing like sweatpants and like a white beater, just sitting on a lazy boy with a beer.
Us now.
I can't even afford a martini off.
Yeah. So he walks in to talk to M, and
I'm
going out on a mission.
Sweats.
Can I get the suit? They're like, yeah, Bond, you can get the suit. He goes and grabs it out of the closet. Oh yes, I look good.
Yes. Well, going to Dr. No, I mean, like, look at his apartment when in the film. It's actually.
We do see nice it, apartment. Which we rarely get to see it.
I think that's like
only
one of 3
times.
appearances.
Yep.
Yeah.
And one of the third was with Daniel Craig. To us, it's so classic. It's crazy all the amount of different things that come from that. Like McCurdy was bringing up, like the famous gun barrel scene, the beginning, how that becomes a staple to Bonds, all the cars, all the different kind of women he meets with all these like crazy names. But at the time to do all that in the first movie is mind-boggling.
To have the perfect prototype that you can then replicate indefinitely.
Yes.
And to do it all, I mean, other than, Q isn't there or whatever, like these minor little details that you can easily overlook. I mean, they make a big deal of introducing the Walther PPK 7.65 millimeter. They make a big show of trading
Beretta, right?
in. He's like, Bond, this Beretta's for pussies, and Bond's like, what?
So
what? He's so dejected.
I also think it's funny though that in the movie, like as you watch the films, they always say like, there's only one man who would carry that kind of weapon, and yet in the first movie, he's like, the CIA and the Americans swear by them. So in my mind, I'm like, well, wouldn't that mean that more people use this weapon?
Yeah. Only one man drinks vodka in the world. You know,
Right.
It's just and it's one thing to know their preferences. It's another to claim that those preferences are exclusive to one human being. But, okay, so I just want to point out from the get-go that it is interesting that we talk about why they chose Dr. No first, and our thought is that it was probably because it was so simple and straightforward that they could pull it off without spending gobs and gobs of money. But the fact that this movie is named after the bad guy, and that's what the book is, but the fact that they would begin the whole James Bond saga with a movie named after the bad guy, which they don't always do. And when it comes to naming a Bond movie, your backup is always to just name it after the bad guy. And then otherwise, it's some kind of romantic toss-up to death or,
Live or let die.
Yeah.
I would say the only exception of that would be Casino Royale, which is just describing
the setting.
It's a setting.
Yeah. So it's interesting that they named it after the bad guy, and they didn't fall to the temptation of let's just name it James Bond or.
Unfortunately, Charlie will tell you that in other countries they did do that. So
please tell us. Please tell us.
I don't have it right in front of me. I was watching a video about some other stuff, but they were talking about how the Bond franchise in other countries, obviously, they're not going to know what Dr. No is, right? So what do you call it? Secret Agent 007 or things like that. Like that was the kind of titles. And, other countries have weird titles for those.
The other thing about the opening is that I had never caught it before. I was shocked to see that it's not Sean Connery performing the gun barrel turn and shoot.
Yeah, it's his stunt double.
Did anybody else notice that? Did anybody else look closely?
I actually did.
I knew it wasn't Sean Connery.
It's so glaringly obvious now, but I never caught it for years because you just kind of, you're seeing it from far away. But even in the way he walks, his face, you can. For some reason, this time in particular, it was so glaringly obvious that it was.
And he's wearing the hat
him.
too.
And I also wanted to note that, like, when you picture, like, if you go up to anybody and you say, picture that shot, like the gun barrel shot, you always picture the theme starting immediately. But it doesn't do that in this movie. It starts it after that shot.
It's like this weird, like, high-pitched sound. Like
it does. It's just like this weird electronic sound.
Name of the producer guys, and then it goes to it.
And then it goes to the theme.
But he wears that hat, and then the hat, Bond with the hat and the shooting the gun is in every film up until Roger Moore, and then they got rid of the hat for some reason, which is just very strange because even in the films, Bond doesn't really wear a hat that much when he's out and about.
I'm sure turning really fast with, especially by the time you get to Brosnan, he would have just thrown that hat off,
Yeah.
That hat never would have lasted. But I think I think this might be the only Bond movie to not have a prologue. The formula was like 99% there, and then it's like that little half.
And no song,
%.
no notable actual performance or anything like that.
Yeah.
There's no Bond song here, but that might be appropriate so far as the opening song is the James Bond theme.
And Three Blind Mice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah.
But it really, it's almost like a Mandela effect thing where you're expecting it to be exactly right, but it's not quite right.
Yeah.
Another thing I noticed in this second time watch, there's no gadgets.
Another thing to throw onto the pile of things that weren't quite there yet, there are fully clothed female bodies in that opening animation, right?
Yeah.
Fully clothed.
Fully clothed.
Just dancing.
You will never see that again. I mean, I don't know about, the rest of the Connery films, but
you'll see
by
it,
the time
but
you hit the next decade, everybody is naked except men. Men are fully clothed. Women are totally naked unless they're wearing like a tutu or something. But it's like
they know their target audience.
But I will say that in the absence of a proper opening song, like what you would have with every film today, and after this, right, after film 2 and on, they don't have some weird song singing about Dr. No. So I challenge you guys, and I challenge anybody watching this. I came up with the title, No Hands to Love You. If anybody can write and perform the proper theme song to Dr. No, No Hands to Love You, everybody here will love you for all of eternity.
I was just going to call it Dr. No Means No.
Dr. No Means No. That's great.
If anybody can make either No Hands to Love You or Dr. No Means No, and we will pit them against each other.
No, seriously, I'll nominate you. I will nominate you for a Nobel Prize in Literature if you can compose that song.
We'll make it the intro.
Exactly.
And it should be noted, though. Yeah, it should be. I think we'll talk about this later, but it will be noted that just because the title, not all of the Bond songs, even most of the Craig ones, they don't really. The title of the song is not the title of the movie.
Because eventually it's cheesy, right?
Yeah.
Eventually it's just kind of
Octopussy. The song is not called Octopussy, so
yeah.
But we'll get there.
So then she gave me her pussy. She had 8 pussies. Octopussy.
Skyfall though is like that. Skyfall is named Skyfall in the song.
Oh, there's
Skyfall. But Casino Royale and
and
Quantum of Solace and Spectre, they don't have a song that follows the title.
Anyway, we'll get to all that. Jumping into the movie, just again to move forward. When you get to James Bond officially introducing himself, which again,
iconic as fuck,
chills.
Yeah,
every time I watch it.
Bond. James Bond.
She, as in Trench, whatever her name is, something Trench.
Sylvia Trench.
Sylvia Trench introduces herself as Trench. Sylvia Trench.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench.
She does the last name, first name, last name thing before Bond does it. It's like he follows her lead as if, he learned it from her. He's like, in the moment, he's like, that actually sounds fucking cool when you put it that way.
It's the I love you, I know moment.
The what?
Of the I love you, I know moment. Like he just went off of her lead because he couldn't convincingly say it normally after that.
If you guys notice though, like they're obviously playing Baccarat.
He refers to it as I looked this up because he says he's like, do you play anything other than Chemin de Fer? He doesn't say Baccarat. He refers to it as Chemin de Fer, which was the original name of Baccarat, and it means iron path, as in a railroad.
Interesting.
So for some reason that game used to mean railroad, and now it means nothing. Baccarat means nothing. So
literally nothing.
But if you watch it, he's cleaning her out too. Because if you know how the game is played, you know that he's looking for nines.
Yeah.
Like he's
everybody's
her out.
laughing by the end. Everybody's laughing because he's literally he never pulls his second card for 4 hands. He's throwing out I think they're whatever they're called, like table wins. Like if you get an 8 or a 9 right away,
he's naturals.
You basically just win. So he's
they're
just
basically
like,
he's nat 20ing like 20ing like 4 rolls.
Yeah, he's in another game that would be him pulling an ace for 4 hands straight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like getting a face card and an ace playing blackjack just 4 hands in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
hitting 21 exactly every time.
Yeah. And then she, in her desperation, is like, how do we get my money back? I guess I could fuck him.
Dude.
Yeah.
She, in her desperation for both financial restitution and dick.
Yeah. One thing, though, before we move on, McCurdy, if you could tell us just a little bit about what Universal Exports is.
Universal Exports is Bond's... Okay, so... Charlie has referred to it as MI6. Now, at this point, the British government actually never acknowledged British, or it's Secret Intelligence Service. They didn't really acknowledge it.
They call it MI7 in this.
I'll get to that too, because there's some discrepancy there. But basically, the British government never really referred to like claiming that they had a secret service, essentially like a CIA. So it's always called British Intelligence, British Secret Service. In the real world, it is MI6. It's Secret Intelligence Service, SIS. If you've played the Call of Duty games, it's one of the factions that you play as in one of the games, at least. But eventually in 94, I believe it was, they acknowledged it publicly. And so then, from then on, in the films, they refer to it as MI6. But before that, it's kind of a code name. So, and if you look at, there's a scene, I think, when he's walking in, it's like says Universal Exports, and then there's a couple other companies. It's almost like if you were to walk into an office building and you didn't know that there were these other buildings, you had no idea that this is British Secret Service. It's just a cover-up name. But that cover-up name is used in many of the films after that to just kind of be like, yeah, it's a cover-up name. But the MI7 thing, apparently he said MI6 before, and he was supposed to say and he said it MI7. There's actually if you look on Wikipedia, there's actually a list of all the MIs. The only two that exist today is MI5 and MI6. Many of the other ones, they all started during World War I, and they got pretty much taken, and each one was different, right? Each one was like, this is intelligence service in charge of maps. This is intelligence service in charge of keeping in foreign people in our country to doing bad things. This is another one that does stuff outside the country. You know, there was lots of different departments, and eventually a lot of them got squeezed into MI5 and MI6. MI5 is probably the equivalent to like our FBI. You know, they do, or something like. What is it? Counterterrorism, something close to that. But yeah, in the film, Bernard Lee says MI7. I think it gets redubbed to MI6 is what I read, or was supposed to get dubbed as MI6. So there is some discrepancy there. But originally he was supposed to say MI6.
As a quick side note, I noticed that is a technique that is done a lot more commonly in films of this era, which is almost never done in modern film, which is redubbing things. They dub a lot.
Just to be clear, they dub every movie that ever gets made like mad. They just used to not try to match it up as perfectly in the past, but today you'll see it's still like whatever crazy over 50% of the audio of any given film is completely redubbed. They're just really good at doing it just like verbatim with the mouth movements. But in the past, they would just be like, nobody's going to notice.
I used to study audio. I learned, talk to my professors about that, about dubbing and ADR on movies. The reason back then they weren't done that as good as they are today is because of replay value. Back then, there was no such thing as VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, whatever. So they would just do things quickly and cheaply because people just need to see it once on the screen in a movie and just go on. Whereas you're at home watching stuff over and over again, people will catch it more often. So audio mistakes, that kind of thing would be a little bit more off. Whereas today, they try to make it pristine because they know people can rewatch the stuff as much as they want.
Similarly with the editing, you'll see a couple times there are these jump cuts. That is usually it's because some actor missed a cue or things didn't line up correctly. So they'll trim a couple of frames and have this very clear, very obvious jump cut that, again, to Jeff's point, maybe people notice, maybe they don't, but it doesn't matter because, you know, whatever. People are just going to watch this in a theater. Maybe they'll only watch it a couple times in their life. And then fast forward to now, and it has to be as perfect as possible because people could be watching it all day, every day in their homes.
All these YouTube videos where people want to nitpick every little issue with a movie nowadays.
Yeah. For me to be more specific, I guess what I was referencing specifically is not just the film technique of dubbing, but rather that they would use an actor whose accent they deemed unfit for the actual audio in the film and would straight up replace that with an actor whose voice is more decipherable to an audience.
Are you talking about the boat captain guy?
Okay, Honey Ryder. Honey Ryder's redubbed.
I'm actually referring to Honey Ryder in the film.
Wait. Her entire performance is dubbed by
someone else.
Someone other than Ursula Andrews?
Yep.
Yes.
What?
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
They did a good job.
What I'm talking about is not just, again, I'm not just talking about the film technique of dubbing a film. I'm talking about fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger in Hercules in New York, like straight up replacing his voice completely.
Patterson, I will point out though, to defend the film to some extent, is that a lot of her scenes are outdoors in next to waves, right?
Yeah.
So when Charlie's talking about they're redubbing, 50% of movies, sometimes, especially back then, filming outside is a pain in the ass. If you've ever done it yourself, especially if you're next to waves or fountains or things like that,
sure.
like you're not gonna get clean audio from waves, especially going cut to cut. So so it doesn't surprise me that they recut
it's dialogue. A pain in the ass for Charlie to fucking edit this shit with just the 6 of us sitting here.
Yeah.
Just a side note on that. On actual, like in places where filmmaking is very prevalent and the people there know, so Los Angeles, when they see a production going on close by them, these people the locals will go outside and do whatever they can to make a shit ton of noise. They'll start mowing their lawn. They'll turn on the leaf blower. They'll honk their horn, put their dog out to bark, whatever it is, so that because they know that these companies are so desperate for silence that they'll send a production assistant over there or associate producer or whatever.
It's usually a location manager.
$100. Yeah, a location manager with a couple $100 to fill their pocket. Say, we're going to pay you to shut the fuck up. So it's like everybody in the neighborhood is like, hey, we're going to get $250 tonight, Sir, it's 4 a.m. Why are you power washing? Just to be clear, though, is it not her voice?
No, it is not. Nikki Van der Zil. I can't pronounce her last name.
And she is uncredited even.
Yeah. There's a lot of people actually uncredited in this film.
Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna say I'll say this. Okay, I like to think I have a good eye for when these odd sped up jump cuts. I have a good eye for that. I have a good ear for when overdubbing happens, even in modern films. The fact that I didn't know this makes me think twice about how good my ear is. I mean, or maybe I just don't know Ursula Andrews at all, or maybe I'm staring below her face, below her mouth throughout the movie. I don't. Which, by the way, to that point, when Quarrel first sees Honey Ryder, his reaction is just perfect.
He just looks at her like, oh shit.
In that moment, all the blood drains from his brain down to brain number 2, and then it comes back, and he's like, anyway, Bond, we're gonna die.
Yeah. To be fair, poor Quarrel deserved that good look before his horrific death.
Yeah.
His horrific death.
He deserved a lot more than just a look.
So, Charlie, you were talking about the boat guys.
We know you're there. We've been expecting you.
I mean, you can tell it's dubbed.
No, it's even better is when he puts the megaphone away, his voice is still amplified like a megaphone.
We'll be back. We'll be back with the dogs. Full speed ahead.
He was headed to his date with the secretary chick.
Yeah.
That he's then pursued by a funeral hearse driven by the 3 blind mice, presumably by the 3 blind mice, and their getaway driver. They spontaneously combust on their way down a hill, and the guy says, "What? How did this happen?" And Bond says,
"How did it happen?"
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
And it's fucking funny, right? Like,
it is funny.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And that is the first Bond joke ever. And there's hits and misses, but I personally always laugh at Bond jokes. I think if you're in that moment and you don't make that Bond joke, it's like somebody making a pun anytime, and people go, oh, that's so corny, and you go, somebody had to say it. Bond has to say it in that moment, especially on the wake of him committing murder.
Now, to speak to go back a little bit, there is a particularly controversial subject here, which is Bond killing someone in straight up cold blood. Because he doesn't often do that. Usually when he kills someone, it's because he was forced to do so in some circumstance. But in this film, he kills a dude in straight cold blood.
We're, of course, talking about the professor.
Correct.
Right? Okay, go on.
It was a controversial thing to do back when this film was made in the first place. But I mean, it's basically, to me, it kind of harkens to the concept of Han shot first, where he wasn't necessarily provoked. Like, he could have let this guy go, or he could have non-lethally subdued him, but he chooses not to do that. He just straight wastes the dude.
Now, granted, this guy.
This is after a murder attempt. Yes, that is
he tried
true.
to kill him twice.
There's kind of a point.
He shot him as a pillow, and then he tried to pick up the gun. Right. So he was eliminating a threat because yes, the tarantula thing. So
yeah,
which I gotta say, the worst possible way to try to kill someone. It's just fucking terrible.
If only Dr. No had been like, look in the cage. Do you see the grenade? Just throw the grenade into his room.
So that tarantula, if you guys watch carefully in the film, that tarantula actually, when he is coming up onto his shoulder, that actually, there's a plate glass. There's actually some glass in between.
I thought it looked weird. Okay.
Between Bond and the spider, because Connery's, I mean, he's like, I don't fucking like spiders. Like, don't put that on
shit on me.
I prefer the plate glass with the real actor over
a CGI
scorpions on Daniel Craig's fucking hand. You know,
and back to Patterson. Yeah. What Patterson said about the gun thing, though, I love, and this goes with what you said, Charlie, about those Bond jokes. He's like, pulls the trigger, nothing happens, and Bond looks at him and is like, you've had your 6, and he just shoots, he just wastes them, 2 bullets in.
Just and you've had your 6.
Well, he's visibly trying to pull the gun towards him, too, so it's not like he's just sitting there like...
He does pick it up, though. He picks it up. And he pulls the trigger, and
it's empty. Yeah.
So it's definitely it's not like it's entirely.
And remember, guys, Bond has a license to kill, which let me clarify: a license to kill is more or less a license that he doesn't have to call his advisors and say, hey, can I kill this guy? He can make that as discretion as he wants to. That's the idea behind it. Yeah,
he's judge, jury, and executioner on the spot.
Yeah,
because he's trusted to know the difference between somebody that should be taken away, like the secretary chick that he puts in the car and drives off with, or somebody who has repeatedly tried to murder him several times, and he's just got to eliminate that threat for king and country.
I agree. Like, I'm not saying Bond is in any way unjustified in killing this dude, but like, he did not kill him in the heat of combat, which is what Bond is typically depicted as doing.
Yeah.
He makes a conscious decision to kill this, like to execute him. Basically,
there are several things I could cut to, like future films showing Bond very much killing personally, but I get what you mean, where it's like, this guy was just sitting there, and Bond knew that he was not a threat, and he went ahead and just
pulled the trigger
executed him. Before the guy had even, I guess Bond got everything that he needed out of him, but he was still questioning him.
Yeah.
But he decided to, cool and cold as a motherfucker to pull the trigger, and even after the guy lands on the ground, he still gives him another one.
Yeah. It's a very subtle distinction here, but it's noteworthy because it occurs in the very first legitimate Bond film.
Yeah.
That we're establishing that Bond is the type of dude who's willing to straight ice a dude.
Anyway, so, Scott, you have a point on the Three Blind Mice?
Yeah, I mean, can we not all just basically agree that very quickly for me, they became one of my favorite Bond assassins, or groups, I guess you could say. Just the fact that they wandered through an entire town blind, what it appears. Blocks and blocks and miles.
Really selling it.
Just to sell that point. To show up at the casino, hotel, wherever the resort,
Not even, like,
I guess,
inside the resort,
they
just hang out in the parking lot.
Yeah, just to ice this motherfucker. Throw him in a hearse.
They could have just walked like normal all the way till they got to the club, and then hunched over, pulled out the glasses, But instead, they live the act. It's like
they
the
fucking
Prestige.
Daniel Day-Lewis that shit.
Fucking, and so they have such a good backstory. Now these motherfuckers just walk around this town blind all day. They didn't
Unless these guys aren't from the island. Assuming the island is relatively small, or at least the town is, everyone knows who they are. Everyone knows they're blind.
Exactly. The perfect backstory.
Everyone's like, "What?
You guys are blind? What happened?
Oh no!"
But this comes back
All
to
three of you are blind now?
They must have looked directly at the dragon or something.
We went to Crab Key.
It was the dragon. It was the dragon.
How much?
Got me.
I also like that they see the sign to the hotel, so they know where they're at. Like, no one else knows that, but they're like, all right, we're here, guys.
And the guy gives them money before they ices.
Yeah.
So perfect.
Imagine being Strangways, and you just got shot by some down on their luck blind guys. Do you think his first thought was, I should have given them at least $1?
I like to
Maybe
also
not
point
enough.
out that scene, modern audiences, when we watch films and they do, this is a gun thing, it's not me, but this is probably, Charlie, you probably could speak to this, that modern audiences, when we see a silencer on a gun, we think of that, or, when all of you guys play the GoldenEye video game, that's that specific sound effect when you hear with a silencer. But in this movie, it's actually fairly close to what you would actually hear. It's more of like a loud, a door slam or something like that. It's a suppression. It's not a complete silence of the weapon.
How brilliant would it have been showing up at the house on the hill if it was the Three Blind Mice walking through that door, just feeling around and then just started shooting up the fucking door. That would have been so perfect. He's just sitting in the chair.
Fellas, what are you doing?
Blind motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Walking in, just going, feeling around the room, and then just start shooting up the bed.
Wait. Are you saying that they would actually be blind assassins, and their whole thing was that they're literally blind and they're walking?
Yeah.
I'm saying I'm gonna one up you, and I'm gonna say that what if the Three Blind Mice were in fact blind, and everybody they killed,
lamps,
they're like killing
tables.
like 10 additional people because they're just shooting in all directions, just
Pure
hoping that they
knocking
hit a
over
target.
chairs, lamps, all that shit. Banging on the wall.
If we're gonna talk about weird shit in the movie, I don't know if you guys picked this up, but when they're in the Kiss Kiss Bang Bang Club, the camera pans around and we follow the waiter to bond and feel it in Ryder and quarrel, and for 1 second there's a guy dancing who's doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We see him a couple times.
He stops and he's like, oh yeah, I'm having fun.
It's the equivalent of the Dave Chappelle robot guy.
Twice. He does it twice.
Oh, he does it twice?
In 2 different scenes of that. And it's, oh my god.
I laughed so hard when the secretary lady that you find out was working for Dr. No and some. I love how you get to their apartment. They're like, we have to let the people know that she is not a white woman. Let's do everything we can to show she's Asian. Let's just get everything we can from a Chinese takeout restaurant, throw it inside her apartment.
He gets laid, and yeah, if you know anything about film editing of the time, like, they weren't very explicit. I mean, obviously North by Northwest, the famous, train going into the tunnel innuendo type scene. But in the movie, obviously like slow, it's not a cut, but it fades into the next scene, and then time has passed. So we know that Bond and Miss Taro have slept together. But I love that, like, they sleep together. Bond looks at the watch, and he knows that he's like, okay, he's already overheard the conversation.
I'll try and keep him here for a couple of hours. All right. I'll have to go now. All right.
He knows how much time he has. You know what? I'm gonna get laid one more time. He's like, I got time. Let's do this.
It's very appropriate that the very first Bond film takes place in Jamaica. McCurdy, do you want to tell us why?
So if you read any of Ian Fleming's books, if you know anything about Ian Fleming, he loved Jamaica. I believe he probably had an I don't know all the specifics. He probably had some kind of naval operation out of Jamaica. But he wrote most of his books in Jamaica. He had his own estate house, and it was called
GoldenEye.
GoldenEye. So
Really?
he wrote so that
Like, for
many
real,
of the
that
Bond
was
films,
actually what
if they're not a title from a Bond book, some of the Bond movies are things that either do with Fleming or things that were in other books, things like that. So yeah, the name GoldenEye actually comes from the name of his estate that he wrote most of his books at.
That's pretty dope.
So
actually.
and other books in the series also do take place in the books. They take place in Jamaica. They've changed around from the movies, of course. But yeah, so it was very important. The first movie kind of be set in Jamaica. It's his one of his favorite places. And I think in the Casino book, I think he even refers to, I'm from Section J, right, which would have been Jamaica. So it's one of it's no wonder that it's one of Fleming's favorite places to write about and experience.
He references it frequently. He sets stories in it frequently. He's in love with Jamaica, so it's very appropriate that this first story would take place in Jamaica. But do you guys think that James Bond felt bad that he, at the end of this movie, he f***ed a retarded person? What? I mean, the whole time he's looking at Honey Ryder like, she's like clearly not all there.
I bet I know a lot more things than you do.
And yet he takes advantage of that at the
end. I'm pretty sure, like I think some of her first dialogue is her like completely dismissing the threat of the island security, and it's just like, bitch, a scene later, a dude gets reduced to a puddle of goo. Like, how are you casually dismissing that this is not a seriously dangerous situation?
She knows about the dragon. She's
fully
fully aware of the dragon, but she's like, I do this all the time.
Deal.
But when that dragon comes, I just get the fuck out.
Oh my god. Yeah, she does absolutely nothing the whole movie. She's just there.
Yeah.
She doesn't. She truly doesn't accomplish anything practical. She accomplishes nothing of any import.
No.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that the first Bond girl doesn't come into the movie, I think, until an hour into the film, right? Like,
it's over halfway
most
through.
of the later films, the Bond girl is at least, the main Bond girl, we should say, at least is introduced early in the movie and then may come back. But this is one of the few times where the Bond girl doesn't show up till much, much later in the film.
Okay. To Patterson's point, let's talk about this for a second. I am completely on board. I will always be on board for Bond being a rescuer, right? But I also agree that she could have. I mean, again, people always want to pretend like tough women didn't exist in film until now or whatever. But
until Alien,
every single time somebody says anything, she pulls out her fucking knife and she's ready to go, right?
Yeah.
Like she's tough.
I promise I won't steal your shells.
I promise you won't either.
But to Patterson's point, at the same time, she never stabs a motherfucker in the face. That would have been great.
They show her with a
if
knife
she
to begin with, and she never uses it ever. She could have.
If you're familiar with the film trope, it is an unfired Chekhov's gun.
Yes.
Well, no, that's not true, actually, because they eventually use the knife. Bond takes it, and he's like, let me take the knife.
To cut some fucking reeds.
He still use it, and then he kills the dude with it, doesn't he?
But Bond is the one who does it.
Does he cut that guy's throat, or does he just
stab
strangle
him
him?
in the side or
Like
something.
it diminishes the entire point of her having it and her being like, I'm the one that's tough, when Bond's the one who ultimately ends up using it.
Yeah, like ultimately Bond should save her, but for her to use that would have been more interesting than not. That would have given her a better purpose rather than to get at the ending.
Yeah, but my point is just the notion that it's a Chekhov's gun that isn't used doesn't make sense. If it was a knife that was just presented and then we never used it after that, then to me I would say, yeah, it's an unused Chekhov's gun. However, it's used several times. So
that is a fair point.
That's just my point to that.
No, yeah, that is accurate. That is a fair point.
And let's put it this way. First Bond movie probably wasn't aiming high in terms of any kind of
social commentary,
female whatever.
Anything.
It was just like, here's a hot chick that's gonna walk out of the ocean in a bikini, and that everybody's gonna oogle at, right? And like, good enough.
Yeah,
good enough.
Mission accomplished as far as that's concerned. To go back specifically to Dr. No, like, this motherfucking movie established all these motherfucking trends.
Yeah.
Like, this film spawned, again, like 25 plus fucking movies.
Yeah.
For my part, that's what I enjoyed about watching Dr. No, is like, this is so recognizably Bond in every respect, really. It has the theme. It has the Bond introducing himself as James Bond. It has the Bond girl coming out of the fucking ocean. Fucking gorgeous. Every dude's is hard watching that. It's... You laugh, but it's
including
true.
quarrels.
Going off what Patterson's saying, though, and I want to say that, like, Patterson, I think you were one of the few people who haven't seen this movie, and a couple of you said you've only seen it once. Going into watching this movie for the very first time, did you ever expect to hear the word Spectre in the very first Bond film?
Shocked me this time.
Hell no, that blew my mind.
I will admit, no.
I didn't expect the song.
So-
I didn't expect Spectre. I didn't expect the gun barrel. Like, it's amazing. Like Charlie mentioned, the formula is like there from the get-go.
But
it just
specific to
evolves
Spectre,
slightly.
what were you like? Were you guys surprised how this film feels like? Oh my gosh, this is actually connected.
Already establishing its own universe.
Yeah.
If I were to point out a weakness in this film, I really did enjoy it. I will honestly say, like, I know we joked about it being the #1 Bond movie so far, but like, honestly, like, thematically, it's all there. My complaint about the film is that Dr. No's justification for doing what he does is particularly weak because it doesn't have anything else to reference in terms of, like, he's like, I'm doing this because Spectre wants it to be done.
They didn't
and that's
hire
it.
me.
There's nothing more complex to his motivation outside of, like, I'm trying to demonstrate Spectre's power.
Dr. No to me was very kind of underwhelming to me for the rest of the movie. Like, he has that kind of cool beginning, and like they established these awesome robot hands that can crush metal that don't do anything else for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. Does it make any sense that he has these metal hands that can bend anything, and yet he can't grip the metal rail,
right, to save his own fucking life
into the radioactive abyss, right? Like, he should just have been able to just go like and just stay in place at least. Well, what you start to see in the future is that as Bond movies go on, you have bad guys with these they generally have a physical deformity, and then they have some kind of augmentation because of that,
or like an elaborate weapon.
It's here or there,
tool.
But usually what happens is that Bond will then use that. He'll use their defective nature against them, and that's what ultimately defeats them. Like here, you get a piece of that by him not being able to grip because of his metal hands, but that doesn't make sense because he should be able to grip firmly. What would have made more sense is that Dr. No falls into the water and he can't swim because he has these metal hands dragging him down, right?
I mean,
that would have made more sense. That would have and because my point being that there's always this poetic nature to how these bad guys die.
And that's what I'm saying is missing to the conclusion, is that like there isn't that ironic or poetic justice done to Dr. No, because it's like when you look at it from a practical standpoint, you're like, yeah, he definitely should have been able to climb that fucking ladder. Like there's no reason why he wouldn't be able to practically accomplish that basic human task.
He should have been able to do it like Dr. Octavius. Without using his legs, he should have been able to climb out of that thing just using his arms, right? Like if they had this been
elbow
a 10th
to
Bond
elbow
film, had this been like a Bond film down the road, maybe it would have. They're like, we have an extra $50 million to pump into this ending. We're gonna have Dr. No have 8 hands, you know?
Yeah. Is there not a childish sense to this conversation when, you know, Bond brings up, well, did you try getting a normal job with the East or the West? He's like, yeah, I applied for the East or the West. So I became a supervillain, and I want to destroy the world because nobody hired me.
I mean, like I said, that's to me, that's the weakness of the film, is that like he really doesn't have a really strong justification for doing what he does.
And after talking about how Christopher Lee was an option to play him, Christopher Lee, I think, could have bring a little bit more actual character to Dr. No himself. Because the guy like this one is like, he overplayed, I think, the sternness, like just the slow talking Mr. Bond, kind of very monotonous likeness to him.
Yeah.
That said, like, it would be hard for me to imagine Christopher Lee doing anything besides the role of Scaramanga in the future.
Yeah.
I know I'm saying that with the benefit of hindsight. Like, obviously, those dudes in 1962 didn't have a fucking idea what Christopher Lee was capable of.
And knowing how future Bond villains will be. Like, there can be one that's going to be way more notable. They're going to have much more personality, like Goldfinger and Blofeld, eventually.
Like, I do want to give credit where credit is due. Like, honestly, like, again, going back to how much I enjoyed this film, I have to give them credit. Like, it really was an enjoyable movie.
Oh, yeah.
It really was. It had all the Bond hallmarks that I wanted it to have.
I enjoy it way more at this movie.
There's no reason whatsoever to ever disregard this movie. There's no like episode 1 effect to this. There's no it's so out. What would be an equivalent? Like, I know people are big Doctor Who fans or whatever, where it's like you have Doctor Who going way into the past. Like,
I'm going to say that definitively right now and right here. Fuck Doctor Who. Please continue.
There goes half of our potential audience.
But overall, like, there are certain movies of the past that people will disregard because they're, you know, no matter how much people will say, no, that's a classic, you can't disregard it. I mean, I think of things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where people ask me about it, and I say, it's that movie is a miracle, right? But you have to have incredible patience to watch it. And they're like, I was on my phone the whole time. That's what most people will do with that. You have to take your phone and throw it across the room and turn off all the lights and watch the whole movie. But most people are incapable of that. But anybody can sit down and watch Dr. No and enjoy it. Solid first episode. We put Dr. No on the board as number one out of one. But regardless, we are obliged to raise up a vodka martini, a Bollinger,
last of my Jamaican
rum, to the one and only Sean Connery.
The water bottle.
Thank you, Sean Connery.
Who passed away, the very first dead James Bond.
Thank
R.I.P.
you for bringing the character to life.
Yeah.
Yes.
For founding the genre, if you will.
Thank you for your on Majesty's Secret Service. Thank you for your service on the Majesty's service. Whatever.
That's Lazenby,
Cheers.
but whatever. Cheers to Sean Connery.
Cheers.